Southwest Florida, welcome back to Lee Pitts Live. You might be saying, where in the world is Lee Pitts Live? Where is Southwest Florida? We are always everywhere. When you see these people here, you may think that we're at the museum there in Charlotte County, but we are not. We'll find out about that museum as well. Of course, Lee Pitts Live is Johnny on the spot here at the Africa is All History party that's taking place with an African theme, African food, African music. Big shout out to Cabino, who's putting it on, him and his lovely wife. We're at the American Legion on Jackson Street, downtown Fort Myers. We're at the early stages, and people are starting to file in. We got people coming from everywhere. We're here in Fort Myers. We got people who are coming here all the way from, is it Punta Gorda? Should I say? Right, I want to get that right. Where the museum is located, and we'll find out about that. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our first guest here at what's going to be a stellar event tonight. Let's get your full name.
I'm Jaha Cummings. I'm the District 1 councilman from the city of Punta Gorda.
And District 1 councilman, in what do you do? You're a city councilman.
Pretty much we run the affairs of the city. The way our city is designed, we are like the board of directors, the city managers, the CEO, and pretty much we oversee the operations of the city day to day.
You look like you got on a pretty fancy outfit representing this event. Did you get that during your time in Africa?
Yeah. I spent a little time in Ghana and a little time in Morocco also, so I had to pick up a few clothes on the way.
All right, cool. It comes in handy. And, of course, we have the preeminent, the mayor, the president of Punta Gorda, the CEO of Punta Gorda, the most popular lady in Punta Gorda. I didn't say the most popular black lady, just the most popular lady. I realized that when I came up there to the conference, that you were like the guru, the well-respected, the people you go-to lady. Let's get your full name and what you do.
I am Martha Russell Beretta, and I am the director of the Blanchard House Museum of African American History and Culture of Charlotte County.
I'm glad I let you say all that because I never get it right. I had a chance, of course, you people have seen me there at the museum. It's one of my favorite places to go, and of course I'll be going back in 2019.
Definitely.
What is the Blanchard House Museum, first of all?
Blanchard House Museum is the first division of my mother, Bernice Russell. And she wanted that to be told because in 1885, the first people who founded and settled Punta Gorda, 7 of them were African American, 8 were white, and 7 were African American. And they settled, they developed the town, and because of them working together, we have what is called a unique sociology. And actually, I do talks on that. I do a talk for organizations, the little town that unity built, because it was unity that provided prosperity for both blacks and whites in Punta Gorda.
Take time right now and give the details to our audience, where you're located, if they want to visit your website, all the contact information, and encourage them to come up to visit, let them know their hours and all of that.
We are open Tuesday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Now, if there's a group that would like a tour on Saturday, you can go on our website, BlanchardHouseMuseum.org, BlanchardHouseMuseum.org, or give us a call, 941-575-7518, and we do arrange group tours on the weekends. We have 2 exhibits. We have a permanent exhibit that talks about the history and culture and contributions of African Americans to Punta Gorda and Charlotte County. A lot of people may not realize that during the midst of Jim Crow, Florida had some of the worst Jim Crow laws. 4 African Americans were involved in the incorporation of Punta Gorda. But we also always have a changing exhibit from September through May. And this year's exhibit is fascinating. It is the African roots of Southern cooking. And actually, Lee...
Right, that's going on as we speak?
As we speak. But you know what?
February, right?
Yes, okay. It goes on. Oh, no, it will last until May.
Okay, that gives me time. Go ahead.
But the thing is, we do the African roots of Southern cooking, find out that Thomas Jefferson just has to have it for America. So it's actually the African roots of American cooking.
When you say it's going on through May, what does that mean? That on certain days? To go ahead and get more specific on that.
That you may see the permanent exhibit and the changing exhibit on Tuesdays through Friday, 10 to 4.
Okay.
And that goes until May. We close near May 20th, which is the Emancipation Proclamation for Florida. Many people think that Florida is Juneteenth. We're not. Our proclamation was read on May 20th, 1865. So that's when we celebrate.
You know, Martha, you make...
Oh, my goodness. Jaha just reminded me of something absolutely wonderful.
Hold on. We'll give Jaha a chance to plug that.
Oh, please.
That way I'm going to work both of you guys in. I'll be coming back to you.
Okay. Thank
But
you,
before
Jaha.
we jump, I want you to poise to Mars thing. But before I get to that, Martha, I want to come back and joke you a little bit. Your extensive knowledge of history, it just floors me all the time. How do you remember all these dates and times and the true facts? Are you just sitting up in a room all night reading all the time? Or just over a period of time and just build in?
Over a period of time, because actually I'm trained as a speech pathologist.
Right.
And so I took this on in honor of my mother. But we do our own research at the Blanchard House. We don't depend upon anybody to. We don't. If there are exhibits that are rented, we do our own research. Scott Shively, Jill Shively, and myself. I write a narrative, give them a narrative, and they come up with something. You met them.
Okay.
Absolutely wonderful.
Now, Jaha, to have a mom like this who's a walking encyclopedia, did some of that stuff fall over that you just inherit some of that as well, or just embrace the whole movement?
Oh, without doubt. We'd be in the car driving, and she would be like, take these notes down. So my whole childhood was research.
This is so funny.
No, really. She'd literally be like, write it down, quick, taking the notes out, write it down. So I grew up with research. Going like, oh yeah, it was on research.
You appreciate that more now and then?
Without doubt, I do the same thing. I go to a movie and take notes.
Yes, he does.
Okay, but let's come back. I'm gonna stay with you for a second. Because I never interviewed you guys together. Okay, and in a setting like this is even more, relaxed. Let's make sure we talk about March something you were trying to plug.
March 5th, an event that goes with the African roots of Southern cooking is called A Taste of Africa Leroy's Style. Leroy's is our Southern cooking restaurant in Punta Gorda. Very nice restaurant. We're having an event March 5th, which is from 5 o'clock, which is going to basically highlight different types of African influenced cooking. You have Creole cooking. We have the cooking of the Seattle, of the Gullah people, and our Florida soul food. And so we're going to have an event where people will be able to taste those and, have little lectures in between. But it's going to be a big event on the 5th of March at Leroy's.
Give time.
Yes. The time is like 5 o'clock or so?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. I'm sorry, 6 o'clock
and
p.m.
And the
tickets are $35, and they're actually limited because the restaurant's only so big. So we're really trying to get people in there and so they can really enjoy.
I know as we're starting to hear some of the vibes of the African music. At this particular event, you may hear some American-made music, but that's not the objective. The objective is to play a lot of those great African musics you can dance to, all the great rhythms of Africa. You spent some time in Africa. I spent some time in Africa. And one of the first things I noticed in moving around when I heard the music, it was just so fantastic, those rhythms.
Yes, awesome. I'm also a drummer as well.
Yes.
I dance, but I was trained as a traditional African percussionist. So I play djembe, junjum, congas, bongo, that kind of thing as well.
Why did you think it was important for you as a councilman and as a person who's concerned about all of the diversity of Southwest Florida? Why did you feel it was important for you to make sure you showed up tonight at this event?
Well, I'm also president of what they call the Cultural Heritage Center in Southwest Florida. In Punta Gorda, we're trying to establish in the state of Florida the only center which really shows pioneer beginnings to our diverse now. And so the African Network of South Florida is one of our members. And so we support all of our member groups, but we're working now to try to actually get the library in Punta Gorda to actually make that the home where all the different cultural affinity groups in Southwest Florida can come and have a place where they can share and just have a good time.
And this is a great event. The African Network of Southwest Florida is an outstanding organization. But let's be clear, this particular event is not put on by the African Network of Southwest Florida. It's put on by local Africans who just want to have a casual dance. We don't want, before I go back over to Mom, you've done some writing yourself. I know you're a publisher as well. Does a lot of the things that you've dealt with in writing and publishing, does it have a cultural theme to it?
Yeah, culture's been the theme, and what I do now, I focus on publishing books that have adaptation potential. So I go to the Venice Film Festival in Italy every August and September take a bunch of catalog books. I'm actually the only American publisher that goes there. So I take books. And so actually, my mother's book, Moon Rebellion, is actually, we're in talks now about trying to make that into a film.
Right. And I read that book, by the way, and it should be a film. We'll come to you in a second because I know she can go. Let me come back over to you before I leave. You said that all of your books have some kind of cultural theme to them. Give us a for example.
Well, like example, going to the Womb Rebellion, we're talking about this deals with people enslaved on a plantation in South Carolina. It actually has people bringing African customs and how those are actually liberate someone so they can actually receive their freedom. Or I have other ones dealing with Micronesia. I have ones dealing with Southeast Asia. I have those on Cuba. I mean, just a whole variety of themes.
Okay, great. The back to you, Martha. The Rebellion. What was the name of that book again?
The Womb Rebellion.
Right. Of course, I read that book, and I've interviewed you about the book. But I want you to take what Jaha just said about that particular book. We want to encourage people to purchase that book and tell them how they can get your book as well.
Okay. Well, it is. They can go to the Womb Rebellion website, or they can get it from Amazon. And what he talks about is there is the African influence. We have in the book an old woman, Mina, who is still very much African in her soul. And she works with this very rebellious young woman and teaches her in the African way. And then I won't give all of it about the book, but the main character, Pearl, the midwife, comes to learn the power of her African ways.
That's right. The having immersed yourself in a wide range of cultures, a wide range of information. You're going to be speaking here tonight. I'm glad to see that you are speaking. I remember when Cabino contacted me and said you were going to be speaking. I was excited about that. Tying Africa to the American, there's a lot Africa in America, but the fact that we have this large influx of native Africans who are spread out throughout the United States doing what they do, how can we as African Americans, you think, continue to develop good relationships with the two cultures?
That's one of the things that I certainly hope will happen, because we celebrate Black History Month and we talk about the accomplishments of African Americans. The one area that I feel that we don't touch on enough is our African beginnings. And that's important. I attended a class that Jaha taught last week. Our children in this country, they do not know about African kingdoms. Mm-hmm. They're not aware of the first meal being served in Africa. They're not aware of the African University in Timbuktu. So it's very important that our African brothers and sisters work with us as we do Black History Month, because it's very important that those things that are not taught. It's wonderful that we talk about the achievements of African Americans, but we need to talk about who we are and how we became who we are.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned Black History Month, and we're sitting here in Black History Month, right? People who are watching this, if you're catching it a little late, we tape in here on February 23rd. This is tied into Black History Month, which will be a part of what your conference. Just give us what you're going to try to get across tonight when you make your presentation at the party.
Well, the one thing, I have to tell you something my mother said. My mother's Bernice Russell, the visionary for the Blanchard House Museum, said you can't tell Punta Gorda history unless you tell African American history. So the point of my speech tonight is you cannot tell American history unless you tell about its African influence.
That is absolutely true. Jaha, some of the things that your mom just mentioned in terms of building relationships, the two different cultures, you've traveled there, I've traveled there, and I could tell you when I was in Africa, the Africans really, really had a lot of admiration for Black Americans. Did you have that same experience?
Very, very much so. I mean, there's actually even, in some places, even a Christ place, those people who were taken, people literally are still worried till today about where they went, what happened to them. And the fact that they saw a physical representation of those people who were taken is saying, thank goodness you're okay. And so it's a good thing.
You know, the cool thing is, too, that in other cultures or what have we, they're not as readily identified as to where they are from as Africans are. Asians, yes. But once you get away from Asians and you physically look at other people other than Africans, you can't really say, oh, he's there. That traces them right back to Africa, except for with us. And so when Africans see us, it's like it's not a whole lot of discussion, right?
No question at all. It's like, it's family. Hey, we having a good time. Oh, it's just straight family. Sit down, have food, and you just fit right in. There's no foreigner thing. It's good stuff.
So you're gonna be pretty comfortable. They're gonna be serving African dishes. I'm more familiar with fufu because of my college.
Okay.
My college roommates were Africans,
Okay.
Nigerians, and I was in their weddings and everything. So we were real close.
Okay.
And so I have a little bit more advanced knowledge of stuff. And their parents kind of brought me into the tribe, made me their son. Here in America, we were all going to Clark Atlanta University together, and they were brothers by African concepts, but from the village, but they weren't. When I saw their parents and I saw four, I said, I knew them as brothers. I never really thought about they didn't have the same last name. They did everything. We brother. Then when their parents showed up on campus, I saw two sets of parents. Then I go, then the African brothers, but the way they conducted themselves, there was no, and the parents were like sisters and brothers. It was just a whole different kind of thing. Elaborate on that.
Yes. Well, like on that, like if I see an older woman, she's my grandmother. I see her, he's my brother. It's my uncle. It's my aunt. That's how it is. Is that our relationships are the whole social group. It's not just nuclear family. It's that we are a community, and it really is literally that way. It's beautiful.
Some of the things here, Martha, that we can see, I see them, that still permeates within our black community, whether it be Native Africans or whether it be African Americans or people from the Caribbean. You still see a whole lot of the things from our ancestors from Africa still as a part of that has never left. Elaborate on that for us, if
Well,
you please.
I told you I started my career in speech communication, and at least 5,000 words that are in our vocabulary are from Africa. Lorenz, I'm having a block his last name, but one of our researchers did that. So the language, part of our language, part of our music.
Right.
Fascinating that, we don't think about it, and not many of us play the banjo anymore, but that was an African creation. And in Appalachia, when they're playing the banjo and they're singing those country songs, that's African.
And that and the food, the way we value family,
Yes.
and all of that. Go ahead.
The way we
Because
value
we all
family.
us got play cousins and stuff.
Yeah,
Play
the
cousins, I
way
love
that
it.
we value family, our respect for the elders,
Right.
the way that our burials, you always put a family member away well,
Right.
that kind of thing. But back to the food, which goes to what we have at the exhibit, the foods we eat, black-eyed peas, the okra. Guess where our coffee came from? Came from Ethiopia. Okay, and so when we used one of our famous companies here, Coca-Cola, guess where the cola nut came from? It came from Africa.
Yeah.
And so the foods we eat, so much of what we do, including when you talk about Southern hospitality, that came from the relationships between the Africans who were enslaved and especially those who worked in the big house. And so even, from language to music to relationships, even religion. Africans were told that our religions were superstition and blah, blah, blah. However, if you go to white Pentecostal churches where they go into trances, where they handle snakes, all of those kinds of things have come from Africa.
And it's so interesting that I'll probably get my date wrong, Martha, but my understanding is the first slaves were brought here in like 1619 or 1610.
Yeah. Now,
And the culture still exists to this day.
Yes.
Some of the things that were left over wasn't even stripped down through over 400 years of enslavement. It's still carried over. Go.
Yes, about the first folks who came were indentured, and then Virginia passed some laws because there were some rebellions. The white indentured servants and the Africans, and so they had to bring the race thing into it and really separate everybody.
Would that be the 1600s?
1700s.
Okay.
Really interesting. But I just had a lapse. You were asking me, what was the second part of your question?
That the culture.
Oh, yes.
Ever since all back
Okay,
there, something that's
okay.
still
Yes.
survived.
Now, I want you to think about this. Let's say if you took a trip that, and understand that they came under really horrible conditions. People died. People were
Right.
dead next to them. But your cultural memory, your culture is something you learn. It's a part of you. It's been explained as everything we learn to do in life. Because you come under these horrendous conditions, doesn't mean that your cultural memory dies with you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that you forget the way that you lived.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, probably more than anything, you're trying to, especially in a traumatic situation, you're trying to remember those things that gave you comfort.
Mm-hmm.
So why on earth would you, just because you took that voyage, forget everything that was African about you?
That is very apropos, and I'm going to take that a little farther. The most, of course, the slaves who were Africans were stripped of being able to read and write and all of that. So all of that was passed down verbally. I'm going to come to you on this. And we still, our grandmother, our granddads, our greats, they are constantly passing stuff down verbally, and it's something about our culture with that. Talk about that verbal passing down of information and history that was so important.
Well, example, there's something called the Ifa tradition, which 15,000 years ago, it is considered by UNESCO to be one of the heritage of humanity. This was a tradition where you have over 4,000 stories that are contained, that are put with different mathematical analysis, which has been passed on from time to time to know how to cure illnesses, how to counsel people X, Y, and Z. So with that said, that was passed, and we learned this. Even when you get back to the class she mentioned I taught a class on Moorish Spain last week about the Golden Age of Spain, and it dealt with, basically the Renaissance coming out of this period where Africans were occupying Spain for 800 years. But the point was, in Africa, when people even studied Islam, you memorize the Quran first, then you go on with your life. You memorize it. That tradition of memorization, it wasn't like you go around we now and the changes. No, the story had to be exactly right. You couldn't get past step one if you did not say exactly right the way the elder said it. So there's also a system of oral tradition where your elders also make sure you actually have retained exactly how it was said, the way it was passed on, because you're responsible now at the griots to keep it going and to keep it going. That's your responsibility to keep it going.
I want to fast forward here to modern day too, and of course, I went to school with many Africans, undergrad and grad school. That was my first time meeting African close up. I had seen the Tarzan stuff on television, all that stupid stuff. And coming from the inner city, I wasn't really exposed to those type of things. So when I arrived on college campus at Talladega College my freshman year, I met my first African, who would be Kalu. And I taught Kalu how to drive, and he befriended me. I befriended him, and I started to learn something that I didn't even know I was learning firsthand by being around African. I said all that to say this. We know that on these college campuses all around the United States and abroad, these African students excel academically. Okay, so how in the world can somebody who has been exposed not appreciate the value of the African brain? Because if you're on a college campus, and whether you're a professor, no matter what your race is, what color you are as a student, and you're interfacing with those Africans, you know that those Africans are dominating in those classes. Expound on that.
Well, one thing, it's like the expectations are so much higher. I went to Dartmouth engineering program. The only students who finished the 5-year program in 4 years were African students. No one else did. I mean, because they came fully prepared with their calculus, their physics, everything. And plus, in Africa, the very top students stayed in Africa to go to the national university, which means if you weren't that, then you come overseas. So no, the expectations of education are extremely high.
So here in America, Martha, I want you to take what we just spoke about and talk about how not only African Americans, but all of us should really, really understand that when we're interacting with the African culture, how valued that culture is, and the brain.
I think that probably in terms
the
of
media the media does a great job of.
But in terms of the people who are allowed to come into this country, immigrants, Africans are by far the brightest of the groups that are allowed
But it's never promoted. It's
But
never
they are
accentuated.
the
Educated of all immigrants will be African immigrants.
Are
This is
African.
documented.
And
Yes.
most people, if you ask them, they would say the Asians or the Indians.
No,
it's
say Africans.
Africans.
But we know better.
We know better.
Educate the people, Martha.
Well, we know better because I have myself worked with a Dr. Kofi Marfor, who was just one of the outstanding people in special education. I worked with Kofi, and he was the best of the best, and the people that I knew about who were African. The thing is that our education system does not, if you took a class in World Civ, they don't start with the beginnings. They start with Western civilization. And so our education system really miseducates about Africa. And so one of the things that has to happen is that we have to insist that if we're going to educate students, that they get a complete education, that they learn about the universe, they learn about what happened, how people studied in Africa, and they, through travel, they taught other people. And so all of that is just very important, but this whole nonsense, especially about the African Americans, that African American history started with enslavement is absolutely the most ridiculous thing you can ever hear. No, it's ridiculous.
It goes there so quickly, though.
No, but it goes there. But we shouldn't let it go there.
Right.
Because that's not who we are.
Right.
We are more than who they say we are. And our children need to know who they are. And the one thing, the way that they can know who they are is by giving them the right education, starting with the beginning. I remember one time.
That's what I was going to say. Talk about some personal.
Jaha came home. He was taking anatomy and physiology. Yeah. He came in and Mom got an A on the test, and said, "Oh, you know how parents do. Oh, that's great." He said, "Why shouldn't I? Medicine began in Africa." That was his statement to me.
Like Asclepius was actually known as the god of medicine in ancient Greece, because everyone up to Aristotle studied at African universities, and that's just something that if you're going to even study the Greek classics, you want to study primary sources. And so we're not saying anything about this thing, but if you're going to study any field, you've got to go to where it began and then come up to the present. That's where it is.
And it all began in Africa.
Before we wrap this up, something you said, I'm drawing a blank right there. I was
You're
going to
getting
go
like
to
me.
you.
You're getting old.
Because this is such impromptu right here, but I want to make sure I hit that. Let's come to modern times, and let's Dr. Martin Luther King. We all admire him. He's the greatest, blah, blah, blah. But when most of the time here in America, piggybacking on what Mom said, it seems like that's where people start and began as it relates to the black history in America, doing black history. Martin Luther King, but it's so much more. And it's so I want you to talk about some things people might research, read books to expound their knowledge on black history.
One thing, like the class I took on, I just taught on the Golden Age of Spain, we need to study about that period between 600 AD to 1492 when Columbus came, because that period of time is often left out. That gave birth to the Renaissance. And if you're going to understand European history, you must understand the history of Moorish period in Spain. That gives you. Secondly, talking about Martin Luther King, living overseas, one thing I saw, there's a difference between respect and rights. We focus a lot of our history discussions about rights, attaining rights. We need to also talk about those things that would gather us respect, and those are our cultural productions, things like that. So a lot of it, I would say, we need to put more time into actually what we produced, and also what we contributed here that was not just civil rights fight related, but actually dealt with what cultural productions we gained as well.
That's right. Yeah. Right, it always seems to just go civil rights, and everything gets shaded over.
The Melville Herkovitz wrote a book many, many years ago, The Myth of the African Past. It's a good book to start with.
Okay, The Myth of African Past.
Yes.
Well, people, the music is starting to play. You'll still be able to hear us loud and clear over the music. The crowd is certainly filing in. We're going to talk to some more people. We got the star of tonight, the historian here. We got a cross-section of people who have already, I would say right now we got about 60 people in here. It'll probably, at its apex, will probably get up to about 150 people because we're early. It's Saturday night. And you just got educated, okay? This is Leap His Live.
I just want to tell you one thing else we got from Africa. Over here we call it CP time, but African Standard, which means you can come 2 hours later.
Only on Leap Is Live, people.
All right.